So apparently I may have misspoken. It is November 17th in Pacific time zone. I know a lot of you are tuning in from Europe and that sort of thing. So yes, November 17th. Hurrah. All right, sweet. Hello everyone, it is I again. I'm wearing my very sexy glasses today. I'm having increasing problems with my contacts. They just like itch and grate on my eyes all day, so I have to wear these things. And for some reason, because they're like so thick, like I'm actually going to put this up to the camera, it like doesn't even fit inside the frame. And I actually paid extra money so they would be even thinner because I'm like -9 in both eyes. So when I put them on, like the whole world fish bowls, and I get like so sick just wearing the glasses that I'm going to wear anyways. So I'm kind of trying to adjust. I mean, it's not a big deal considering I'm only going to end up wearing my glasses on my computer. So I'm going to try to figure something out on that so that I don't get nauseated every time I just want to like walk to the kitchen to cook food for myself. But either way, the focus is StarCraft and not my eye problems. And today we're going to be checking out Bisu vs. Jaedong again. They've played so many times in general, and especially on Destination, which is kind of cool because we get to see all the sorts of changes that they make on one map. Because so often when you're watching a bazillion StarCraft matches, what ends up happening is that you kind of lose track of exactly how a player is playing, and it's always really funny if you sit down, choose one player, and watch like 30 of their games in a row. What ends up happening is you start seeing all these patterns go on. So hopefully we'll get a chance to check out that sort of stuff. So let's go ahead and transition right over to the monitor. Look at how many people were at WCG this year. It's absolutely insane some of the camera shots they end up getting of the crowd, because this is like way more people than are even on in Korea anyways. When they just have like OGN matches. I mean, look at the size of that. Jesus. Well, anyways, skipping ahead, going straight into the game. So Bisu fortunately spawns at the south position. And the reason I say fortunately is because it's impossible to wall off at the top position. I prefer a lot of 9-pool openings, especially recently, with speedlings, and it's a lot harder to wall off at the top position. It's a lot harder to get in there with Zerglings at the bottom position, so I personally, from a Zerg player's point of view, feel that Bisu's a little bit fortunate to be at the bottom, especially if he was playing against me, man. He'd be screwed if he was at the north, so we get to see some very fancy dancing from the commentators. Always fun to see. So we have an overpool opening from Jaedong. Excuse me. We've seen them do this plenty of times on Destination, because the fact of the matter is, if you want to expand, it's always going to be really hard, because any player who early expands as Protoss is going to be sending that probe out on 8 to check you out. So you really do need to get that early pool, not only just to get that probe away, but also because these positions are really close and all sorts of this other stuff. I mean, you can try to get away with 12 hatching, and I don't mind at all doing that sort of opening, but you need to make sure that you can deal with any sort of variety that Protoss opens with. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because it's really important to emphasize. You don't need 2 drones here to fend this probe off. You need one of the drones to take a few shots, which is that drone we see here, and then the next drone to just start firing away and trying to expand as it is. It's so much easier to plant that hatchery if you just have one drone. And look at this. By only having one drone attacking that probe at this time, you can split your drones up and get your expansion up at your expansion, your third gas, around the same time that you'd want to be doing that all anyways. And Bisu, very, very good with this ordering. Look at that. Nexus, then Cannon. It's always important to know like all the orderings and this sort of thing, and not to overreact. That's probably something I'll emphasize in almost every Protoss vs. Zerg, is how the player is not overreacting. A lot of Protosses, especially at lower levels, screw that up. End up getting like way too many cannons and gateways and that sort of thing. And if we look at this from Jaedong's perspective, he's also not overreacting in any sense. He's only gotten these 2 Zerglings. Look at that. I don't see any Zerglings anywhere else. He even saved up larvae so that way he could get some extra money on those hatcheries. Poking forward a little bit with the Zerglings. Probably feeling comfortable with what his overlords are seeing, so he knows he doesn't need to scout back. Actually, we can watch that all happen right here. He's probably checking right here with this Overlord, and then he starts sending the Zerglings down. So especially in Zerg vs. Terran, move that one of those early Zerglings down here to your opponent, like right away. Like one of your first Zerglings should always go straight to your opponent to make sure you don't die to anything stupid. But probably Jaedong was looking right here, so when these Zerglings moved forward a little bit, he saw some ordering of buildings or structure there that made him comfortable just pulling back immediately. He sees, like, not many cannons going on there, too, so right now everything's, like, as normal as possible. So something I've said a lot that I should mention in this game as well is, everyone's trying to figure out a key to stopping 5-hatch Hydra into Mutalisks, and, it's kind of funny because we haven't actually been seeing a lot of 5-hatch Hydra into Mutalisks. A lot of Zergs are doing this sort of heavy turtling style and just going for Lurkers and Mutalisks instead. But there's still a huge amount of discussion. There's even the Liquipedia Q&A about how our Protoss is going to deal with it. And I've been saying, like, again and again that I think the way Protosses are going to start combating Zerg's style is just to be really aggressive in the early stages of the game. So, just be aware of that in any Protoss vs. Zerg you're watching. Jesus, look how popular StarCraft is in China. Holy cow, that's so many people. Oh my god, I'm like blown away at that. Look, it stretches all the way to the back. This almost reminds me of the Sky Pro League many years ago. They got 100,000 people to show up to it. But yeah, I mean, I would clearly say that this is the highlight match of all this. And notice what these Zerglings are doing. One's following, and the other one's trying to get in front of the probe, and no other Zerglings are being made. None at all. Very comfortable just checking in with those two overlords. So yeah, in any Protoss vs. Zerg you end up watching nowadays, just be mindful of that early aggression. It's really cool to see the sorts of stuff that players are doing. We're slowly starting to see more Zerglings added on. These Zerglings are going to serve two functions. First of all, they're going to help any sort of early aggression. Now is about the time when players have started to move out with 3 Zealots and a Dragoon and that sort of thing. And having these Zerglings with speed out can help hold that off. But you never want to just make stuff to hold off some attack that may come. You want to make sure that there's an additional purpose to that, which is why these Zerglings are going to be doing a lot of poking around here. Especially on Destination, there's a lot of creative stuff you can do with these Zerglings. Look, coming in right before that cannon ends up finishing. These Zerglings, you don't always have to try to get them to run by to do stuff. For instance, you could have them swing around the expansion and do stuff to the natural. That's always really good. I'll end up pointing out that attack path in just a little bit. There's Jaedong. He just looked completely indifferent to crushing Bisu. Yeah, go Jaedong. So we see more Zerglings coming out. What I like about the way Jaedong plays this game is he's just really, really aggressive right from the start. What I was saying earlier is that those Zerglings don't necessarily have to squeeze in around this way. You can a really great abuse is to come right here and to attack the assimilator from this side to the left. I personally don't know if I have an opinion about the fact that there's no cannon here. I mean, obviously you want to try to get away with as much as you can. You don't want to be relying on having a huge static defense always, because the Zerg player will naturally get ahead. But I mean, here, I don't know if I really like that there's no cannon here, just because a lot of Zerg players will sneak in and kill off this gateway right here. There's actually a really epic game between Pusan and Savior on Reverse Temple, and Pusan accidentally built his cannon outside of range of his forge, and Savior just brought an extra few Zerglings and killed it off. And it's really bad to lose like a gateway or forge at that stage of the game. And I see no reason why, in this case, Jaedong couldn't have done that. I would just say that that's something to be mindful of. Oops, meant to click on the screen here. Here we go. So this is the sort of stuff that is really good to do. Whoop, can't talk to my mom now. Gonna have to ignore that for a little bit. My mom's cool. She uses Skype and other sorts of technology. Yeah. So basically, we have this main right here. And when Jaedong was in there, he was running around a lot, but he wasn't exactly doing anything direct to his opponent. He was just sort of pulling units back, and to plan these sorts of attacks is really good. You don't need to force these Zerglings in the main to do something. A lot of players will do stuff like get the Zerglings into their opponent's main, and they'll try to start killing off probes. They'll try to even start sacrificing all the Zerglings just to get a few extra probe kills. And they underrate the idea of just keeping the Zerglings wandering around and looping and this sort of thing. And here's a very clear benefit right now, is the fact that this sort of attack is a nice opportunity to poke in there. Now, if we just back up, let's count these bloodstains on the ground. There looks like 2 right here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, it looks like about 7 Zerglings died. Okay, 8 right there. And I never want to defend, losing a whole bunch of units for not doing too much, but I really think those 8 Zerglings ended up paying off for Jaedong. And that was really just, there's no overcommitment by Jaedong. Jaedong poked in here early on in a very nice move, and then tried to go for some huge crushing blow early on, but now he's just pulling back very comfortably. We're starting to see now how those Zerglings were not essential to doing anything in his early game, but they allow him to do something a little extra. So, and see, here's the early aggression that I've been mentioning a lot about, and because Bisu was able to be, or because Jaedong was able to break into Bisu's main so early on, Bisu hasn't really been able to do any of that sort of aggression. If we look, though, at Jaedong's composition here, everything's totally normal. He's doing the usual sort of 5 hatch. All his building placement is so good. Make sure you use that sort of sexy building placement. Oh, yeah, I love that. Look at this. This is absolutely incredible placement. Or alternatively, having the hatch here and the den there is also a really popular choice. And look, right now, everything that Jaedong's doing is very standard, but here's the first twist. He's getting Mutalisks, which is a little bit unusual. This is a transition that a lot of players have been liking. Instead of opening up with Zerglings and then going Scourge and then going into Hydralisks, we see Jaedong here building a Sunken Colony at each place and then getting Mutalisks. I think that if his Zerglings had not done all that damage, and if Jaedong was not completely aware of what his opponent was doing, he would have gotten maybe 2 Sunken Colonies, or would have been prepared to get up to 2 Sunken Colonies. But as a result of that early break-in, he has a little bit of extra money to play around with, and now he's getting to break in here with Mutalisks. Really, really simple game plan when you sort of reflect on what's going on from Jaedong's point of view. But if we stop for a minute and think about what happened from Bisu's point of view, Bisu had all these Zerglings run in and do a whole bunch of damage early on. And, well, maybe not damage so much, but at the very least distracted Bisu a whole bunch. And Bisu may have had some plan to run in with Zealots or that sort of thing, or do some sort of early aggression. But now, all that timing's been thrown off. So you'll note that right when Bisu was aiming to move out and to do some sort of aggression against Jaedong, Jaedong already had Mutalisks, and Bisu was totally on his back foot. And now we see the Mutalisks just running free all over Bisu's base. And Bisu's trying to do some stuff with these Dark Templar tactics, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, but I want to talk about how to deal with having Mutalisks in your main right here. Obviously, continue making Corsairs and continue spamming cannons. I don't want to say always get Dragoons when you're in this situation, but definitely don't discount this. Players often rely way too much on just Zealots and High Templar trying to get Archons. But unless you are really aware of how you're going to use that Archon to hold off this sort of stuff exactly, Dragoons can be really helpful. The Dragoons can end up covering your Corsairs really easily, and Dragoons have a pretty decent amount of life against Mutalisks, so... Now we have a little bit of time to talk about this Dark Templar stuff. Right now, because Bisu's in a bit of a jam, he needs to get some advantage here. But this is what I call trying to force an opportunity to happen that might not be there. These sorts of Dark Templar tactics can be really cute. You have a few Zealots to take hits from these Sunken Colonies. You can use the Dark Templar to kill off drones. Excuse me. But it might not necessarily be the case that you can do that. And it's important not to just sacrifice Dark Templar in a blind attempt to do something. Dark Templar are really useful just wandering around the map doing all sorts of other stuff. Yeah, like this sort of stuff. Look, he wandered up with the Dark Templar and then pulled right back out again. You don't want to over-obsess about doing a tactics with Dark Templar because then you end up losing them for free. And right now, Bisu might be in a situation that was worse off than if he had just never brought the Dark Templars in before. Because right now, look, there is nothing even anywhere close to Jaedong's base. Right here, this line, everything below here is Bisu stuff, and everything above is where Jaedong is, and where Jaedong has complete control over. So right now, let's take a brief look at Jaedong's situation. Obviously, he's doing a whole lot of fancy stuff with Mutalisks. He's making some Zerglings here. He was making a few extra Zerglings just to build up enough of a force to hold off this sort of push. But everything is fairly normal. He's not getting overexcited with the fact that he broke into his opponent's base with Mutalisks. And also, if we look at Bisu's point of view, he has 4 gateways and 1 Stargate. What this composition is generally, to me, indicative of taking a third base relatively early on. Because if you think about it, especially in this situation, but also in other situations, Zerg is not going to have that many Hydralisks at this point. He's either going to have a lot of Zerglings, a lot of Mutalisks, and occasionally Zerglings and Lurkers coming in. So what you can do as Protoss, to get your third expansion really quickly, is you get a Zealot Archon army with a handful of Corsairs, about 6, and you expand around the time you get your 6th Corsair. You move out with your Zealot Archon group, you beeline with all your Corsairs to the opponent's base, and then you expand, and it's really, really easy to do that. Normally, if your opponent just had a whole bunch of Hydralisks, he would be able to kill off the Archons and the Zealots without speed, and you'd be screwed. But in this case, we know that the Zerg is not going to have that many Hydralisks. Another great example of this is Bisu against Shine on Eye of the Storm. Bisu ends up doing almost exactly that, and it looks like he has a composition that would suggest he's doing that again this game, or at least trying to. So we're going to now see how Jaedong ends up dealing with that. This is a very, very normal sort of thing to do if you're in Bisu's situation. Bisu moving up this way, generally if you're moving this way, I would end up saying you would expand here or something like that. Because there's no speed going on here, I'm not so sure if there's going to be too much damage that'll be done to this top right expansion, but still, Zealots and Archons are a really scary force. And also, this is important to note, look at this, he has +1 attack already. He's moving forward to attack right when he's able to kill Zerglings very, very quickly. Alright, so yeah, look at that. Look at that timing. Getting the +1, and he has Zealot speed right as he's approaching his opponent's main. Now here's what I really like about the way Jaedong's playing this out. So notice that Jaedong has Scourge here that almost certainly are going to be used to kill off any potential observers that end up arriving. That's why these Scourge are running away from everything instead of being able to get in a good angle and kill those off. And because there is a Lurker there, Jaedong does something that we have not seen in a really long time, which is perhaps the most innovative aspect of this game, like the most noteworthy thing to watch, is this counterattack right here. Because he focused so much on Mutalisks and Zerglings for early defense, and use these Mutalisks for a little bit of harass, but in particular, having this many Zerglings is definitely a defensive maneuver at the early stages of the game. Jaedong was thinking, how can I do a little bit of extra something with these Zerglings? You don't want to just have stuff for potential defense. You want to be able to do something extra. And here we see an awesome counterattack. And this sort of counterattack will screw up so many of Protoss's plans. I mean, seriously, you're in a situation as Protoss where you're either going to be expanding here, maybe expanding here, trying to do some sort of pressure up here. Maybe you're trying to build a bunch more gateways. Maybe you're trying to do some sort of harassment coming up. No matter what it is you're trying to do, Protoss is in a tough situation, because if you're trying to be aggressive and your game plan revolves around being aggressive, you still have to come back to deal with this counterattack. If you are planning on expanding or doing something like that, you're generally not, and you're moving forward right here to secure an expansion. This sort of counterattack is going to screw up all that expansion timing. And right here, the fact that these Lurkers have come out at this point in time means that any early aggression is just stopped dead in its tracks. So I really, really like this look of Jaedong. And notice how everything's flowing together. I need to stop to emphasize this. In fact, it's so important that I'm taking up the big screen. I'm not just like hanging down here in the corner. I'm like doing everything I can to drive this point home. And that is that when you're thinking of new ways to play, or even if you're encountering weird situations and you're in an ordinary game, think about rearranging components as opposed to doing something drastically different. If we briefly look at the screen, we have the usual mix of 5 hatcheries, and we have a whole bunch of Hydralisks coming out, and Lurkers. Think about the normal way that you end up seeing these units in Zerg vs. Protoss. Think of the 5-hatch Hydralisk into Mutalisk that everyone has been talking so much about. You open up with getting the 5 hatches, then going Scourge, then Hydralisks, then Mutalisks, and then Lurkers. But here, we have Jaedong going Mutalisks, and then Lurkers, and now he's getting a bunch of Hydralisks. Everything ends up being about the same around this point. But before then, Jaedong broke into Bisu's main with Mutalisks, and then Jaedong just broke into Bisu's expansion with all those Mutalisks and Zerglings. By rearranging, he had these weird opportunities that he would have never had the chance to do if he had been doing this normal 5-hatch Hydralisk play. So that's really interesting to see that sort of rearrangement by Jaedong. Not a change, but a rearrangement of all these aspects. And look at the way that Jaedong is just constantly sending stuff down towards Bisu's base. First it was those Zerglings early on, and then the Mutalisk down here, and then the Mutalisk Zergling counterattack, and then all these Hydralisks and Lurkers are now coming down to Bisu's base again. I mean, it's just relentless how aggressive Jaedong has been this game. There's almost nothing really that Bisu can do about it after he's had those first few fumbles early on. Especially with that really cool counterattack. And Jaedong absolutely knows it. Jaedong is a master of this sort of thing exactly. Beating your opponent in the situations where your opponent is supposed to stay alive. I mean, if you're early expanding as Protoss, you're not thinking, well, the instant my opponent gets Hydra Lurk, I'm doomed. But of course, you're playing Jaedong. He figures out some way to pull out some brilliant doom. Totally love this sort of stuff. Jaedong is the man. And this is just usual sort of cleanup coming up from Jaedong. But I mean, let's just briefly review this game as we get a chance to open it up for a few questions. So we're going to zoom in, not on this lady, but eventually on the mini-map. Look at this. This is just brilliant. I love this. Watch how much movement there is down to this side of the map. Look how little Bisu can actually do in terms of moving up here. So here we have the Zerglings that just got into Bisu's main. We have more stuff coming in right there. Here's this attempt at a counterattack. Attempt at a crunch right here. This is where Bisu was dealing with Zerglings in the main. Alright, we have someone who's waving. He's giving a peace sign. Alright, cool. We had these Zerglings running around in Bisu's main, and then Jaedong tried to crunch in from behind and from the front, but then he ends up pulling back very normally. Nothing too extreme going on. But he's only back on his side of the map for a little bit. See, here's the push of Zealots coming right here. It's a little bit hard to see because it's grainy. But yeah, look, here are the Mutalisks. And watch this. The Mutalisks end up following these Zealots down, trying to do a little bit of damage. But once there's enough Mutalisks, just straight for Bisu's main. Yeah. Killing off a whole bunch of stuff in Bisu's main. And then look, more harassment going on right here. And now Bisu's starting to pull himself together. He's getting Zealots and Archons. We see some more harass. Getting some more Zerglings. This, again, is a very defensive play. You want to make sure you have enough Zerglings to not die to a push before you end up getting the Lurkers. It's a very, very normal thing, but here's the push, and Jaedong has Lurkers, and here's a Chin that you'll be seeing. It's an awesome Chin. It's a quality Chin. But right now we have this big group of Mutalisks and Zerglings that do this counterattack. And especially after this counterattack, see, look at this. There's a counterattack doing all this damage. And Bisu is trying to move in, trying to do some stuff, but there's Lurkers there. Ends up taking way more losses than he wants to. And then the final blow that ends up just demolishing Bisu. It's amazing to see the ways that Jaedong can find to win. Really nothing extremely unusual. I mean, he's not doing something like Up Magic where he's getting an unbelievable unit combination that no one would think would work. He's doing just the most just slight little tweaks and changes here and there, but he can do so much more with them that he ends up winning in these ways that his opponents are not prepared for at all. And one thing that I actually think is perhaps most important to emphasize, if we just look back at the screen, just look at that mini-map right there, in the midst of this huge push down, the huge push that ends up killing Bisu, Jaedong's expanding. This is not an all-in play by any means. This is him simply taking advantage of the aggressive opportunities he's created for himself throughout the game. He's not doing any sort of all-ins. A lot of players are going to see this, and what they're going to take away is, hey, if I attack early with Zerglings, and if I try to sweep around with Mutalisks and Zerglings in, like, right after the first push, then I can always kill my opponent if I just batter him down with Hydralisks. It looks like a 1-2-3 easy sort of thing, but still, even if it didn't work as incredibly well as it did right here, and win in like the next 10 seconds, Jaedong still has all these expansions running and is taking even more. So yeah, let's take some questions, and again, please post your questions in yellow because it's much easier for me to read. So where is the Van asks, could Bisu have tried to go for a much more Sair heavy build and try to keep whoops, sorry, it ended up blipping away. Yeah, could Bisu have tried to go for a much more Sair heavy build and try to keep Jaedong back on the defensive with his Hydras? So I think the big issue is that Bisu lost momentum in the early game. He needed to do some sort of push that would freak Jaedong out a bunch in order to pull back. So if we actually go back to the game and just look briefly here, it's around this time when... right around here, yeah. So here's the Mutalisk harass coming in. So now Bisu has to do something really incredible. So here's his first Archon push with Zealots and Corsairs. If you're going to be doing that sort of thing, I think it's important to make sure that it's... How do I want to say this? With that sort of composition, I'm pretty sure that an expansion or some sort of thing like that would end up happening. And a lot of times when you do move out with that composition, Zealots, Archons, and Corsairs, you move in different patterns with the Corsairs and and your army, especially if you're geared towards an expansion or something like that. So to answer your question about could Bisu have gone for more Sair heavy play, I think if he did go for a heavier Sair composition, he would have moved his Corsairs to attack, like those 6-7 Corsairs to do some sort of attack, and then use his Zealot Archon army to defend his expansion. In this circumstance, because he had less of those, he kind of needs to keep his army together, because 3 Corsairs by themselves aren't necessarily going to do anything. I think what's most interesting to note is that with such a mobile army, you do have to worry now about counterattacks, because that's not something that a lot of players would be thoughtful of, but now I think clearly a lot of Zerg players are going to pick up on this and start incorporating that sort of stuff into their play. Generally don't see a lot of counterattacking going on in Protoss versus Zerg, so hopefully I answered that question. A little bumpy, but I promise to improve. So let's see. Endless asks, have a question. When you pump Mutas out and you're going for his main but see a Zealot march, should you go straight to his main or should you defend the expansion? What I would say that defending the expansion can't be bad, but in an idealized world, you need to make sure that your expansion is just barely able to be defended and then just immediately beeline for his main. And we actually saw that happen if we go back to the game. And this is a good bit of judgment and experience. Let's see, where's the exact point in time where this happened? Yeah, so here are the Mutalisks just now popping out. Look at the way that Jaedong ends up doing this. So here's 4 Zealots coming in, very scary. We have the Scourge there, prepared for the Corsairs. So the first focus of these Mutalisks is to defend the expansion, is to kill off these Zealots. I think Mutalisk just killing Zealots is highly underrated. Excuse me. Especially because players don't do this sort of thing. They haven't really encountered Mutalisks versus Zealots in a very long time. But look, he takes a few shots at these Zealots and does a pretty decent amount of damage. But then he just straight up goes for his opponent's main. And some of that has to do with the fact that he's waiting for that critical Mutalisk number, because you need about 7 or 8 before you break into the main. But also, he did take a few shots at these Zealots, which was just enough to get Zerglings out to defend that. So I think that was the key factor in deciding when to do that. What I would do, if you're playing games and you're ending up in situations where you have to make that decision, try to do one in the extreme, because when you watch the replay, it becomes much more clear what you should have done. So for instance, you should see it and then ask yourself, do I defend my expansion or do I go straight for the main? Let's say you go straight for the main. What'll happen in the game, if that was the wrong choice, is you'll just lose the expansion, and that's not a really good position to be in. Even if you end up winning the game, I still don't recommend always taking the choice to sack an expansion to do some huge damage in his main until you really, really know what you're doing. Alternatively, if you defend your expansion and you can do no harassment to your opponent, it's very clear when you're watching the replay, wow, there was like a 30-second timing window where I just could have killed as many probes in his main as I wanted to, and my expansion was going to be fine anyways. So just look for those sorts of things, and always do the extreme response and start to work more towards the middle. Don't try to go for the middle, because sometimes it's less clear, and learning is the most important thing always. So Groby C asks, the 4-gate push is used to take your third, rather early, but 2-base Protoss vs Zerg supports more gateways than 4. Would it ever be a good idea to boost your gateway count higher than 6 for a timing attack? Definitely. I think that's a really, really good alternative for Protoss to do. The way I would think of it is that Protoss needs to have some way to get a third. The way in which you take a third is like the fundamental question you should be asking yourself in Protoss vs Zerg, assuming you're early expanding. So let's think about 2 ways right now. One is to keep your gateway count low, get Zealots and Archons out really early, and actually you end up cutting the Zealot speed so you can get more Archons and move out even earlier. But you get the Zealot Archon army with a good amount of Corsairs, and then you can take your expansion very, very quickly. The reason you have the 4 gateways is because you spend the extra money that you would have spent on gateways on the Nexus and the cannons and all the appropriate defenses. So that's a fast third base sort of play. Alternatively, you can get 6, 7, 8 gateways and do some monstrous push. You get your third a lot later. Your timing attack is a lot scarier, but your third is still just as defended as it would have been had you done the very, very early expansion grab, the way that I thought Bisu was going to do in this game, and the way that Bisu likes to do in a lot of circumstances. Both of them have their trade-offs. If you take the expansion early, you can potentially lose to early attacks, and you give your opponent a little bit more of an opportunity to power. If you do the really huge aggressive push, or let me rephrase it. Ooh, sorry, I said that backwards. Yeah, if you take the expansion early, you can put a little bit of pressure on your opponent, but you end up kind of having you force Zerg to have much more smoother production. You have him balance between having some army to hold off your Zealots and Archons, or the concern of that, and then he can start adding on drones. If you do that 6, 7, 8 gateway push, Zerg gets a little bit more opportunity to power before your timing attack, but then your timing attack is very, very scary as well. And it's a lot easier to defend your third because you have this huge-ass army. So yeah, those are just the trade-offs to think about. So Clockwise asks, in Bisu's position, when he saw the lurkers, why did he try to go for Jaedong's natural instead of going back to his expansion, controlling his half of the map? What I would say is that the reason Bisu went for the natural is because he was totally shocked and in a really weird situation when Jaedong counterattacked. I was saying earlier that it's really atypical to see that sort of play by Zerg. So if Zerg ends up counterattacking you and you're all the way at the other side of the map, you need to say, is it worth it to bring my whole army all the way back to deal with this threat? Or can I take care of this threat with the units being produced from my gateways and do a huge amount of damage to my opponent with this army by just straight up attacking him? And I think because of Bisu's unfamiliarity with that sort of counterattacking play, I think what ended up happening is Bisu said, well, I think counterattacking is the right play. And Bisu tried the counterattack and ended up failing miserably. I think what would have been... the correct answer is not should he have brought it back or should he have gone straight for the nat. I think it is how can he put himself in a situation where he never even has to ask that question? How can he prevent the counterattack from even occurring? So, yeah. Taking more questions. Clown Baby asks, when should Zerg switch from pumping drones to producing lings? That's one of those timing sorts of things. Obviously, what you want to do is rewatch your replays from your opponent's point of view. Actually, I've done this a lot, and it's so helpful. I watch it from the Protoss's point of view. I actually take vision off myself, and I'm watching it from the Protoss's point of view, and I pause, and I say, okay, so it looks like the Protoss has about 4 Zealots. So I would need about 10 Lings to hold this off, because these 10 Lings can delay those Zealots and give me enough time to produce the extra 4 sets of Zerglings, 5 sets of Zerglings to kill this when it reaches my expansion. So if I vision myself and I have 20 Zerglings, I go, whoa, I'm getting Zerglings way too early. So the answer is that you should be mindful of adding on more Zerglings as your opponent starts adding on more gateways. What normally ends up happening in Protoss vs. Zerg, especially nowadays, is that the Protoss will get the Stargate, and then he'll get just 2 gateways and go straight for Templar and try to do some magic with a Zealot push early, or with some Dark Templar early, that sort of thing. So you don't have to rely too much on Zerglings early on. You can actually get quite a few drones out, make a few sunken colonies, completely defended, nothing to worry about. Later on, when those 4, 5, 6 gateways start coming out, and you don't have lurkers yet, that is really the key time where you need to start producing some Zerglings, or at least have larvae available so you can make Zerglings if your opponent comes out. But in order to discover that timing, rewatch your own games, and take vision off yourself and watch it from your opponent's point of view. Great way to get a benchmark for what's going on. So Zerg Needs Food says, in a podcast you talk about redundancy. In modern Protoss vs. Zergs, it seems that though the first Corsair is important, that's the only function the Stargates currently hold. So, of course, the question is, why are we not trying to do more with that Stargate? What I would say is that that Stargate serves such an instrumental purpose in the game that it's worth it to spend the extra 150 of both resources and the extra 150 minerals and 100 gas to get the Corsair, because just being able to know exactly what the Zerg's doing allows you to skew all your decision making for the next 4 or 5 minutes. And that's such an incredible benefit to Protoss, especially because, probes aren't going to do anything against Speedlings. You're not going to have any clue what's going on with your opponent. Because of that sort of effect of the Corsair, that incredible scouting effect, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to just make the Corsair and then not do too much with it. But it is true that you always want to be looking for situations to extend the purpose of things and make sure that you're not just getting the Corsair for anti-air and then getting a whole bunch of Archons and Dragoons and then having the anti-air anyways, except it's slower. So that's why so many players like Bisu, for instance, get a lot of Corsairs and try to do a bunch of stuff with those Corsairs because they want to make as much use of the Stargate as they can. And they do an incredible job of that as well. I don't think there's anything necessarily bad about just making a Corsair and doing an incredibly specific response based upon what you see. But I do think it's great that you brought that up, the idea of making sure that the Stargate isn't doing nothing for too long, because you can use that thought on your other buildings and the order of everything and when you're getting defense and when you're moving out to make sure you're not doing something that you don't necessarily need to, so you can shave off those little bits of stuff, make adjustments, and have more money to spend to do stuff. So here's a question from Aeon Death, I believe is how I'm going to say that. Aeon Denotic. Oh, that's a hell of a name. Yeah, it says, why didn't Bisu attack Jaedong's third? There was only one lurker defending. Great question. I think part of it does have to do with the panic that Bisu probably felt. Bisu, think about it, what happened from Bisu's point of view. Bisu moves up to this expansion and sees a lurker. Anytime you're a Protoss player and you see this, it's the most normal thing in the world, so you back up just a little bit. What may have happened, let's say no counterattack happened, what may have happened is that Bisu got attacked by the lurker, pulled back a little bit, moved in with the Corsairs, saw the vision of that high ground and said, wow, there's only one sunken colony here and I only saw one lurker spike. Maybe I can just kill this. That's what would have happened in a normal game. What probably happened is that Bisu got this huge counterattack, freaked out and suddenly was like, oh my god, well, should I go for his natural? Well, I've already mentally crossed off this expansion. Okay, should I pull back? I don't know. And was probably going back to his main, building all these stuff, trying to do this crisis management there, that he didn't take advantage of that expansion. So I think what is great that Aeon D. Nautic is pointing out there is that if you were rewatching the replay from Bisu's point of view, and if you're starting to play against a lot of Zerg players who do what Jaedong did, Bisu should start saying, when I do get counterattacked like this, the third is probably wide open. So that might be an opportunity for me to just run over that and be in a huge advantage. Those sorts of counterattack plays are really cool. They're really hard and high level to do. I hate to use that word because it makes it sound like you can't do it if you're like D+ or C-, but I would just say that it's a weird situation to be in where you say, oh yeah, and it's just normal for me to sack all my expansions and 20 probes because I get to kill off 2 of his hatches and all this stuff, and it sort of balances out in the end. I would say don't be scared of doing that, but don't be scared not to do it either. It's always good to do safe plays and plays that sort of stretch out the length of the game because you get more practice and you emphasize stability. Monzergs asks, so when is it good to get Mutalisks cut this early? Ah, God, the stupid scrolling bar in the chat is hiding what I want to look at. I lost that. Yeah, so when is it a good time to get Mutalisks out this early? Anything in particular that Bisu did that forced him to make this decision? So, yeah, it says anything in particular you think Jaedong identified in Bisu's build? I think... I think that it was a decision from Jaedong from the get-go. I mean, think about what's going on from Jaedong's position. He's going to 5 hatches, and then he's getting the Spire really fast for the Scourge. He's getting the Hydra Den, the Evolution Chamber, all that normal stuff. So right now, what does Jaedong know? Well, he knows that he can kill off some of these Corsairs. He's somewhat aware of what the gateway count is. And in this situation, you need to say, am I going to be defending an early attack with a bunch of Hydralisks and really nice turtling, or am I going to be defending it with a bunch of Mutalisks? That's really the pure binary decision that Jaedong's facing. Oh, and I guess, he can get lurkers and that sort of thing. But it looked like it was just a decision, that it was part of his plan to get Mutalisks, because not only can you hold off early Zealot pushes and that sort of thing, you can do this sort of counterattacking. You can get a lot more map control with Mutalisks. You just need to be very, very careful of losing a bunch of Mutalisks to Archons and Corsairs and losing to a Zealot Archon push. But I'm almost certain that Jaedong was prepared for that, as we saw him change so much, or as we saw the evolution of his play as that game panned out. I mean, he got the lurkers at the right time so that when when the Zealot Archon push did come, he was prepared. So, a very short answer for your question is, I think that it was a pre-game choice by Jaedong as opposed to an in-game choice. I think that the choice to go Hydralisks versus Mutalisks was made long before he scouted his opponent's base. So, yeah. I have time for just 1 or 2 more questions. And you know what? I'm going to take one from our friendly neighborhood, USA Protoss. Louder. I question whether it's the real Louder, because you can do any name that you want. In fact, someone could just choose the name Day 9 and we could have 50 Day 9s hanging out in the channel. But there's only one Day 9. Louder asks, if Bisu splash killed the lurker and destroyed the Nat, sending only a few units home, he could have won. Thoughts? Yes. I do think that is something that could have happened. But of course, that's one of those like hindsight things where, because we have total vision of everything that's going on, and because we are because we see that not that many units were continuing to flood the counterattack, I think that Bisu is just in such a state of panic. I think it takes practice to deal with counterattacks. Let's take the map Peaks of Baekdu in Zerg vs. Terran. That was a really common map for counterattacks from the Zerg, because the Terran would have to move out in two directions. He would have to move out on the side that I'll call the wide open side, or he'd have to move down this little thin choke, which was a faster time to get to your opponent's base. But because it was a thin choke, Zerg players realized that they could leave all their stuff on the fat side, and when their opponent moved down the thin side, they could counterattack, and it was too hard for Terran to funnel all his stuff back in. So as a result, a lot of Terran players ended up building a whole bunch of defenses and that sort of thing, and they changed their play in order to account for that possibility of counterattack. So I think now, in regards to this game, yeah, I do think that Bisu could have either sent some units home to defend the counterattack, maybe just suicided for the expansion and killed it with ease, all these sorts of things, but I think it's so hard to see that clearly when you're getting counterattack for the first time ever, because not only are you startled, but suddenly your focus is brought completely to the expansion, defending that, dealing with that, continuing to build units, trying to cluster your probes around cannons, that you don't have enough mental capacity to start really critically thinking about the amount of lurkers that are at your opponent's base. So what I would say is after maybe 4 or 5 games of practicing that, not too many, but just a handful, Bisu might have discovered very clear ways to deal with this sort of counterattacking, and maybe very clearly would have just gone, oh yeah, I can just kill him and it's no problem, and then bam, totally dead. So I'm already regretting my decision to mention that you can change your name to anything you want, because we have about 15 day 9s in the channel with underscores and 4s and this sort of thing. So yeah, we have time for just one more question, so I'm going to try to make it a good one. Yeah. So I will take one from Scrix. Scrix asks, whoa, there's so much typing in the channel, it's filling up. Scrix asks, was Bisu's problem the fact that he was playing reactively, making Archons after he sees the mutas, and making a Robo after he saw the Lurkers? Excuse me. I think that it may have looked reactive, but again, that Zealot Archon Corsair combination is so strong at being aggressive, dealing with early unit combinations, and taking that expansion early on, that I think it's an example of him reacting, but not in a way that's purely like, oh god, I need to do this just to stay alive. It's like, oh, I can get Archons to help me stay alive from these Mutalisks, but then I'm going to use the Zealots and the Archons anyways to expand. So it didn't really change his play, it didn't really interrupt anything. It actually flowed in quite nicely. And I think the fact that he ended up getting the Robobay at that stage, I think he was starting to get thrown off a little bit over time. I wouldn't necessarily say that his problem was that he looked reactive. I would say his problem was that he was in these tight situations where he was kind of having to go, oh, I need to get Archons now to hold off these Mutalisks, and oh god, now I have to get this Robobay to get observers. Being in that situation is what you want to avoid, as opposed to what are the decisions you're making in that situation. And allow me to just pontificate on that a little bit more. Because StarCraft is a real-time strategy game, anytime you're in a situation where you're saying, what is it that I should actually do here? And am I making the right or wrong decision? Oftentimes the answer is not, what is my decision right now? It is, what could I have done 10 minutes ago in order to avoid this? Or what could I have done 10 minutes ago in order to have already won by this point in the game? So always try to think back as early on as you can and start making changes from there, and you'll have huge amounts of success and you'll be the man. Yeah. So that is going to sum up Day 9 Daily number 18. Almost hitting 20. We'll have a big celebration around that. And we're going to be doing a Zerg vs. Terran tomorrow because I love that matchup. And then on Thursday, we're going to be doing pure map analysis. This is something that someone suggested. There's going to be a lot more interaction on that one. I mean, I know I do Q&As at the end of these sorts of things, but in that one, we're going to be doing a lot more interaction. And the idea will be to take maps, look at it, and just talk extensively about the maps. I'll probably have some example clips from videos, but a lot of it will just be us looking at the map and talking about it. So we'll be able to take questions like, hey, what would I do in Terran vs. Terran here? I've been having trouble with blank. So yeah, if you have any suggestions for maps you want covered, definitely post that in the thread on teamliquid.net. And with that, I will end the cast. Thank you so much, everyone. Ta-ta.